Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on the post-Soviet press, A Long Road to Freedom. I'm Liz Schwartz. I'm the Director of Communications and Events at the Shorenstein Center. I'm very excited to welcome our moderator and panelists today. Before we get to that, a few housekeeping items. Please, when we get to the Q&A portion of this discussion, you can put questions in the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll be checking those and our moderator will pull them into the discussion. And if you have any technical issues, you can chat to the panelists or to Ali Hensky, who is behind the scenes managing our tech setup. This meeting is also being recorded, as you may have heard, and will be published on our website in the next couple of days. So if you do ask a question, you are giving permission for that question to be included in the recording as well. So to introduce our moderator and host for today, Ann Cooper was a spring 2020 Joan Shorenstein Fellow at the Shorenstein Center. She has more than 25 years of radio and print reporting experience, including as NPR's first Moscow bureau chief, covering the final 5 years of Soviet communism, and as bureau chief in Johannesburg from 1992 to 1995. She also worked as executive director of the Committee to Protect Journalists prior to joining the Columbia Journalism School faculty, where she retired in 2019 as CBS Professor Emerita of Professional Practice. She has continued to write about the Glasnost era in Russia and the subsequent decline of press freedom in Russia and Russia's global media strategy, including in her Shorenstein Center fellow paper, Conveying the Truth, Independent Media in Putin's Russia. We're very thrilled to have Ann back with us today to host this really fascinating and timely discussion. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to you and Ali and the Shorenstein Center for organizing this. I want to start by telling you something about the picture that's up on the screen here. This is from June 1988. It's at Pushkin Square in central Moscow, or just off the square, outside the offices of Moscow News. The glass cases that you see there have all the pages of the latest edition of Moscow News, which was a weekly paper. Okay, so June 88, Glasnost is well underway. Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of giving journalism some more freedom. He always saw boundaries to it. The journalists didn't necessarily, and Moscow News was always out there pushing, harder than anybody else to start doing investigative reporting, start reporting not Soviet propaganda anymore, but, real stories about real issues, about the history of the Soviet Union, about corruption, and just so much more. It was an incredibly exciting time. If you did not subscribe to Moscow News and you tried to get it at your kiosk where it sold out probably in minutes, the day that it came out, this is what you had to do. Go down and, stand in front of these glass cases and read the paper. And as you can see, that's what people were doing. It was an exciting time, a time of real optimism about the freedoms that people were being given, and that included the press, journalists. And 3.5 years later, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, a lot of that excitement was still there. And suddenly you had such a new situation. One country that had been 15 republics was suddenly 15 different separate countries. And there was a lot of euphoria in the West. A lot of people probably remember how, Western donors, governments and private donors rushed in with democracy building projects. And a lot of them were focusing on trying to establish press freedom and independent media, independent journalism in these 15 countries. And it was possible to imagine then that, maybe not all 15, but quite a few of those countries would embrace democracy, would, down the road, have strong press freedoms, have good communities of independent newsrooms serving the public. So here we are 30 years later to talk about how that all turned out. And spoiler alert, reality is not quite exactly what we imagined back then. You know, if you think of the goal to the extent that it was articulated at the time, it was, you know, we want Western style press freedom. We want, you know, the people in these countries to be served by independent reporting, investigative reporting, accountability journalism. You know, you have elections, you choose leaders, the press is there to hold them accountable. So that was the dream. The reality, I would say, is that maybe 3 of the 15 countries have really achieved that. And those are the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They serve a grand total of 6 million people out of 293 million people who live in the former Soviet republics. So most of the other former republics have leaders who exercise various degrees of authoritarianism when it comes to journalism and press freedom. They range from Turkmenistan, which we hear almost nothing about in this country, but it's pretty much as repressive as North Korea is in terms of information control. Belarus, we've heard this year about dozens of journalists imprisoned, news sites shut down. Russia, the latest round of Kremlin pressure has sent independent journalists literally fleeing the country, and how they move forward is a big question mark at this point. So, you know, it's not a cheerful picture if you look at the whole post-Soviet space. But, you know, there are countries in a kind of middle ground, I would say. They don't have the freedom of the Baltics, but they do have important communities of independent media that have survived the ebb and the flow of press freedom, you know, as politics change in their countries. And they continue to do very vital work without getting much of our attention. And this 30th anniversary of the Soviet collapse seems like a good moment to look at that middle ground and what's happening there. And I'm going to list 4 countries. You could argue about, you know, including some others, but I think there are at least 4 former Soviet republics that fall into this category. And they are Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. We're going to focus today mostly on the latter 2 with our guests, and let me introduce them now. Oleg Khomenok of Ukraine is a member of the board of directors of the Global Investigative Journalism Network. For more than 2 decades, he worked as a journalist, an investigative reporter, and very importantly, as a media trainer, including in other former Soviet republics. So he knows this landscape very well, not just in Ukraine, but beyond. And Corina Cepoi, who I've known for a long time as an advocate for press freedom and for media development in the post-Soviet region. She's from Moldova and currently is the country director there for Internews. But in her years with Internews, she's also managed media development projects in Kyrgyzstan. And we're going to hear from her a bit today about one Internews project in Moldova that is trying to help Moldovan independent media work toward financial sustainability, which is so important, as we're going to hear. 30 years later, so many independent sites are still dependent on foreign aid. What do we do about that? How long can that continue? How do we help these, the independent media continue and survive and thrive without being at least as dependent? But Corina, I'm going to ask you first to talk about one thing that happened in Moldova, but it's really a characteristic of Ukraine and maybe most, if not all, of the former Soviet republics. And that is that, TV remains the dominant source of news. And most or all of the TV channels in Moldova and so many other places are owned now by oligarchs or politicians. They're using TV as a mouthpiece for their political views or promote their business or support the government so that they can get more government contracts or whatever. And they're not using it as an institution serving the public need for information. So explain to us how TV in so many places went from being the chief platform for Soviet propaganda to now being, the voice of oligarchs and politicians.
Well, hi, and nice to talk to you today. But responding to your question, it's somewhat self-explanatory because, as you said, TV remains as one of the main sources of information in Moldova and a few other countries. Internet did not surpass TV in terms of sources of information, including for political choices or other vital information for people to base their decisions on. So oligarchs thought that buying out channels really leads to preserving a channel of communication with the public and influencing the public as well as promoting their agenda. So what happens when a person gains economic control, gets to power, or first gets the TV channels and then gets to power, they use it, or let's put it more bluntly, misuse it to actually control, disinform, and sometimes really not only represent their own selfish interests, but also represent the interests of another country, which happened in Moldova in terms of external disinformation and really propaganda against the EU values, the values of the country itself.
This is a phenomenon, though, that I don't remember hearing anything about 30 years ago. Why didn't we foresee it?
We did not foresee a lot of things. As you said, 30 years ago, it sounds like a lifetime. I was just calculating, I was a student, I was demonstrating. Later, I got involved in media development and freedom of information, as you said. And I remember us joking about closing down. We felt like we're doing such an important work. The countries are developing, they're democratizing, and we would have independent media, trained journalists, developed universities, trade unions that would function. Nobody would need us, these media serving NGOs. So what we've seen, actually, the pressures on media became more subtle, more sophisticated. So it seems like the bad guys evolved while the independent media, which exists, is vibrant, as you said. We have wonderful investigative journalists, but the mainstream media, where you need a lot of resources like TV stations, did not really expect for this to happen. Sometimes you have strong independent media outlets and they do not survive or are at the brink of extinction because not only TV channels are bought out, but also sales houses. So advertising market becomes concentrated and controlled, as well as audience measurement mechanisms and companies. Those are controlled too. So you are cornered from every side and you end up with a country like Moldova where most of media is controlled.
Yeah. Oleg, I want to ask you about another story just played out in Ukraine about a rich guy in media. And that, of course, is, the owner of the Kiev Post last month firing the entire staff, shutting it down temporarily, bringing in a loyalist to run what has been one of the country's most respected newsrooms. This, again, is a narrative that we've seen in other former Soviet republics. Talk to us about what happened there to the extent that it's really understood, what happened and why, and, what it tells us about the state of press freedom and independent media in Ukraine.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm glad to attend this panel and to be at this webinar. I think that there are two trends or two factors that might be quite explanatory for what happened with Kiev Post. because Kiev Post had been existing not only in the format of newspaper, but also as in the format of the online. And that's the trend that might make Ukraine quite different from the other countries, because I checked the results of the sociology of the media penetration in Ukraine, and actually on 2019, TV had 66% of the population that was using TV as a primary source of news. This year, the result of the survey shows that it's 46. They lost 20%, and less than half of the population is using TV as a primary source of news. And that's the reason I believe of actually the war with Russia that Ukraine has since 2014, and actually the propaganda tools that were used widely by the oligarchs for the manipulating with the public opinion through the TV and online and social media are growing. And this year, social media as a primary source of news now is 63%, which more than half of the people are using as primary source of news social media. And that means that the owners of the media or oligarchs and political tycoons, they are interested in taking control over the online media, since they are growing and they are becoming the primary source of news for the most of people. And that was, to my mind, one of the reasons why that happened with the Kiev Post. And actually, we can see that now there are some efforts in concentrating of the online media in by different political groups and oligarchs. And the other reason is that Kiev Post, as a English language media, was actually disclosing a lot of facts and information that the government and the oligarchs didn't like, and that's the reason, which was actually disseminated throughout the world. And it's easier. It was easy to see if to check the analytics of their traffic, and that's another reason that the owner was under pressure by the different political forces, and that was actually the reason why they considered to shut down the media and to make it more loyal towards the owner, which means that to the government and to the actually getting rid of the objectivity and criticizing of the situation in Ukraine.
So that's really interesting. The statistics in Ukraine is far from the only place where we're, finally seeing a shift towards, people looking more online for their news. Russia also, where, you see the overall figure, and I think it's like 70 or 75% of the public, gets their news from TV. But when you break it down by age group, like 18 to 24, or 24 to 35, or however they categorize it, not the majority by a long shot are tuning into TV. So I was wondering, are the oligarchs paying attention to that?
And at the same time, I think that if to look at the distribution of the news and actually using of the primary source of news of some media, the actually the local and rural area is much more using TV stations and not using the online. But I checked also the using internet every day, and it's grew up during the last 3 years from something like 60% to 82% this year, which means that Ukraine has really there are two factors again. First is very cheap internet, since you can get almost unlimited and high-speed, good quality internet for something like $10 to $20 per month, which is not so high price if to compare with other countries. And second, the good quality, the good speed of internet in the towns and in the big cities, but it's not quite well developed in the villages, which means that people are still using TV for this for the news gathering and for understanding what's going on. And there is another trend also, which is visible from the sociology, that people are actually the trust to the national media is higher than to the local media. So especially for the TV channels, because as I understand, most of TV channels in Ukraine are split not only on the national level between oligarchs, but on the local level. Local oligarchs have their own TV channels, which actually are producing the alternative reality. So you can switch on the TV and see what's going on in the news, and then just look out of the window and understand that you are living in some different country or different location, different village. And that's the result, is resulted with the lack of trust to the local media in favor to the national ones.
Yeah. So online is so important, obviously, because that is where, you know, independent journalists have been able to establish, you know, their work. You don't have the expenses of a TV channel and cameras and
the print as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Online is much cheaper than to print, since about 40% of the expenses in the budget of the newspaper goes to the print costs.
So I wonder if either or both of you are concerned that we're now going to see, as oligarchs and politicians look at these, you know, audience numbers, if we're going to see, you know, efforts to shift away from TV or maybe not even away from TV, but to, you know, start trying to gobble up digital sites. And how vulnerable are they?
They are vulnerable, definitely. What we see already are troll farms, and that's these methods that originated further away from Moldova. They are used by politicians that were in power recently. But now, thank God, things are changing. We do hope that with a more pro-democratic government, pro-EU government and parliament and presidency, things will improve also in terms of media ownership. We have no guarantees, regretfully, for it to happen, but we do hope that this will. So in Moldova, at least we have some hope that the transparency of media ownership will be better. We already saw more legislation oriented towards transparency and even limitations in terms of media ownership from sources where you cannot track the final beneficiaries, and these are the offshores. So the same goes for banks, but the current parliament also included media ownership. So that's a good sign. In terms of online, that's already, as I said, happened. We saw troll farms. We still see them. In terms of websites, especially fake websites, where you cannot see who is behind it, and projects that actually work on that to rate websites and see where is the author, because sometimes you don't really know who's owning it, who is the author, and usually political forces are behind such shady and at times scandalous platforms, I would call them. We also have to take into account that Instagram is growing rapidly. We see podcast users appearing in surveys, because when we conducted our last survey, there were no podcast users practically. The same goes for TikTok. Now we have them growing. So unlike in Ukraine, we still have TV dominating as a source of information, but social media is growing fast. The internet in general as a main source of information is really close towards TV, and print media is dying out, though we have some good examples where those remaining learned how to consolidate the only independent or the few independent print media outlets thriving if they plan properly and they focus on that generation that still needs to be informed.
I'm not sure I understand yeah, go ahead, Oleg.
Yeah, I just would add that thinking about the media online and the efforts to control the online media because of the growing penetration and actually reaching people, I would say that social media are growing very fast, and I agree with Corina. We have the social media number one is Facebook, and the second seat is on YouTube, because actually there are trends that people are changing the ways, the habits of consuming news. They are watching video, and that's the phenomenon of TikTok as well. And that's a kind of actually struggling for the control of the media that are distributing content in a video format online, including the social media, and actually struggling for engaging the bloggers and famous content producers. We have changed actually even the terminology, because it's hard to say whether these people are journalists. They are media persons, or they are influencers, since they distribute some content and that influencing of the people.
Or content creators.
Content creators, yeah, or content producers, whatever. And at the same time, I think that another factor that might be taken in mind is the lack of the critical thinking or critical mindset, and actual paternalism. So natural trust that was from the Soviet times to the media, that if something has written in the newspaper, that's true, and it just is exposed to the online media as well. So the lack of media literacy, which is also quite important for the independent media, so people would understand when they are manipulated by the media. And that's the factors that I think that are not well developed in the post-Soviet countries.
So it sounds like you're raising concerns about the future of digital media that are not so much about oligarchs might come in and take over, but there are going to be all these other competing other things like troll farms competing for attention. Is that the issue more?
I think it's all of the above. Yeah, go ahead, Oleg. Sorry.
I would say that that's not only oligarchs, but also the other countries, since the people are becoming kind of objects on the battlefield between the different geopolitical actors. And I would say that Ukrainian neighbors might be very interested in influence over the public opinion before the invasion.
And that's not necessarily Moldova as a neighbor. I want to state that. But in terms of influences and different players, I would say now we have a very complex media environment. It's not as simple as before, and that's what we have to take into account. It is about troll farms, sometimes supported by oligarchs, sometimes by external forces, as Oleg mentioned. We have plenty of that. We have also new media, new platforms, and content creators, sometimes representing malign forces as well as genuine activists. It's really nuanced. It's not that easy anymore. So we have to take into account all of this and act accordingly.
Yeah. So Corina, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you have a new government. There were elections this year, and pretty solid victory for a very pro-European party, which has not always been the case in the outcome of Moldovan elections. And Moldova actually got a shout out from President Biden at the UN in September, who cited it as an example of, hey, people are saying democracy is dying around the globe. Look at these places. And he named 2 or 3 places. Moldova was one of them.
Yes.
And then you had a visit from, I guess last month, from Samantha Power, who was kind of reinforcing that message. And I wondered, tell us more about that and what you think, what difference, if any, you think it might make for independent media, for press freedom in Moldova, because it has, the development of independent media there was so important, or based so much on foreign support and foreign funding, and still relies on foreign funding to a large degree.
We do have high hopes for the current government because we do have laws that are outdated. As I mentioned, we have media transparency issues. We do have players from outside Moldova that influence the agenda of people here, manipulate and disinform. All this has to be regulated through proper legislative mechanisms and regulations that translate into actions. Right now, we only see the beginnings of that. And some of these beginnings are not really well thought of because, changing the entire board of the Broadcasting Council, or the membership of the Broadcasting Council to be exact, in one move, not really using all the legal mechanisms that are in the laws right now, that can happen again when the government changes. The same goes for the public broadcaster. In one day, or let's say in a week, we realize that there is a different supervisory board, a different director. Again, we see a lot of, I would call them hasty move or rushed out moves that are meant to improve the situation, and we are looking forward to it. But the way it is conducted is questionable from a legal point of view. So again, our hopes are high, but right now problems exist, both in terms of communicating by the government with the media and the population in general. Even on COVID-related issues, transparency of the government is spotty. We just had, under our project, a report launched on transparency of organizations in Moldova, state public organizations. That report was really well designed and published by our partner, Freedom House, here in Moldova under this project. And what we've discovered that some of the public authorities don't understand at all what that means, or they provide all the information you need and everything in between is there. So we have a very spotty performance of the government right now. It's a beginning. We hope this will improve. We hope that the legal issues will be resolved, as access to information laws practically don't exist. They're so outdated that they impede access to information of investigative journalists, which we have, and they're amazing people working on investigations. But they have still problems almost every day. So the hopes are high, the beginnings are somewhat spotty, and we'll see how it goes.
I would add that in Ukraine, there were some positive changes after the signing the association with European Union agreement, which actually affected with actually lawmakers adopted several laws that are disclosing a lot of public information in the machine-readable data, which enabled existing investigative reporting agencies throughout Ukraine. And the setting up of the Freedom of Information Act legislation also affected to the conditions when reporters can get information, but it's, as Corina said, still unstable, and it depends on not only by the ministries or some governmental bodies, but also by the regions. In some regions, you can reach and get the access to the information that is public. In other regions, you will get the answer, no, this is classified, this is personal data, or whatever it could be. And I would say that another result was the creation of the public service broadcaster, not just the state TV, but the creation of the company that is really producing independent news. And if you would ask me, is there any independent media or independent TV channels in Ukraine, I would rather start it with the naming the public service broadcaster, since it's also depends of the people who are running this company. But I would say that they have enough energy to resist of the any attempts to influence on the editorial policy of the PSB.
Okay. I want to ask both of you about foreign support, especially financial aid. I've been interviewing journalists in both countries and other former Soviet republics, and just hearing over and over again, yeah, we started, X years ago with a grant from the US Embassy or from, Soros Foundation, or, and that aid continues today, maybe, not at the same level, but still a lot of independent media is very dependent on that foreign funding. And I can kind of imagine foreign funders saying, wait a second, 30 years later, wasn't this supposed to take off and become self-sustaining? And I know that's something that you're working on in Moldova, Corina, with an Internews project. What do you say to donors? Is this ever going to end? Is it still necessary to have that support?
It is necessary, but it has to be better thought through. The problem is that the foreign assistance is a blessing and a curse, because sometimes it is easier to apply for funding than find alternative sources of income. And that's what we've noticed at times. We do now work with media to convince them. And we, I think, are successful to convince them that they need diversified sources of funding, because you never know when this funding will stop. You do have to show that the readership and the readers support you. And I do believe it is important, even if you lack the funding, to show to your donor or the potential donor that you still have support also from the local people, from the population. And that is possible. That's what we've seen with our project here. We do invest in the development of media. So that is important. Not here's a funding for you to fund this type of content, and in a year we'll say goodbye to you. But when you invest long-term in your partners, you already see results. You see better run organizations, better organized with all departments, policies, and mechanisms for it to be successful in place. And you also see that people subscribe, they support. And I was mentioning print media outlets that can be successful. We have an investigative newspaper now platform that has video content, that is multimedia, but their print version is still growing in terms of subscriptions, because they have an online platform for subscribing to them. They have an excellent marketing campaign, and they still have growing numbers when everywhere in the world these numbers are going down. So these type of examples are really inspiring. And we had to work with difficulty to convince the journalists that they need to be managers if they have no one else around to actually hire as a manager. And we do have now partners, then when they say who they are, they say, I am a manager. For us, it's a huge success, because they would always kind of brush us aside and tell us, you know what, I'm writing well, I will find that money, don't worry. What we're now trying to show already the success is that if you organize properly your media outlet, you have this wonderful content, you can place them on this frame or canvas of a good, well-run organization that can actually show that they also have membership support, advertising, and subscriptions as well.
So I think the investigative site you're referring to is ZDG, and I see we have a question already from the editor there, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah. Yes, and the question is for you. I'm sorry.
I know, but I'm not sure I know the answer. Anyway, but before and please do put questions in the Q&A. I'm trying to take a look at them, and we'll get to them in a few minutes. But Oleg, I wanted to ask you also about foreign funding, because it seems like in Ukraine the independent media have been able to, if not become completely self-sustaining, or at least some of them, they've had more success than in a smaller place like Moldova. And is that accurate, and why, if it is?
Well, I would say that first, Ukraine is much bigger than Moldova, and it has much more media. So, and there is a diversity between the media. There are some sustainable and independent media, and there are media that are actually fed by the political parties or oligarchs or whoever else who wants to come to the office and get the reward after this. And but at the same time, speaking about the technical assistance and support of the independent media provided by the foreign donors. I have part-time with Internews network in Ukraine, so I know how it works. And just dealing mostly with investigative journalism, I can tell that the foreign assistance resulted with the creation of the number of the independent non-profit media, which actually now is changing to the looking for the support from the community. And a lot of efforts are spent in helping these independent media in changing the sustainability model from the grants to the either donations or the subscriptions, a variety of the paywalls and other tools that can be used by the media to be sustainable. We have the online TV channel in Ukraine that gathers through Patreon. This is the system that enables the membership model. They are gathering something like $10,000 per month from the viewers, and that's actually the online TV that is broadcasted also by the public service broadcaster, and that's a good sign of the trends in Ukraine when people are becoming ready to support the media that they like, and that's also one of the important tasks that might be developed with the support of the foreign donors to change the audience approach and change the audience attitude toward the media from the just getting rid of the everything is for free model to the model that good product might be paid for.
Yeah, let me ask you about that, the public support. So Oleg, you were a coordinator of the YNUkovych Leaks project, which was this amazing effort by Ukrainian journalists who rescued waterlogged documents when Viktor Yanukovych, who was the president, was fleeing the country in 2014, dried out the documents, organized them, digitized them, put them online. And the Global Investigative Journalism Network, after that project, said that it had an impact on Ukraine, much like Watergate did here, that it inspired people to want to become journalists. And I wondered if it also helped inspire more trust, in the public, whether that's, something that that kind of feeds into what you're talking about, the fact that people are willing to go on Patreon or, do a subscription, probably, more so than they are in some of the other republics. I mean, do you see an after effect today of Yanukovych Leaks?
Well, I think that it was very powerful wave that raised after the Revolution of Dignity and after Yanukovych Leaks. Since I would say that within the year, at least 3 national TV programs had been launched by the investigative reporters teams. And now we have 10 organizations that are working throughout Ukraine on the local level who are members of the global network, which means that people are actually demanding, and there is a huge interest in the investigative reporting and actually more going not only to asking for the questions what, who, when, but also why and what does it mean and what to do with this. People became more interested in going in depth of the information, and people had started to think more in the from the point of the actual taxpayers and actually the employers of the governmental officials. But at the same time, I would say that for the proper development, or at least democratic development of the society, there is a need to have like the three pillars, or independent media, strong civil society, and independent justice system. We have yet not finished the court reform, and actually no one was convicted after YNUkovych Leaks documents had been passed to the prosecutor office, and that creates a kind of disappointment in the society, because as one of my colleagues like 10 years ago had written on some blog that Ukrainian media became totally independent because nothing depended on them. You can reveal the highest level of corruption and nothing would happen after this. But I would say that it was 10 years ago, it was like this. But now we have some small changes. So we can see that after the publications of the Panama Papers, or after the publications of the other leaks, there are some efforts that are done by the prosecutor office or the anti-corruption court in just fixing this. And also not only on the global level, but also on the local level, because we have now several non-profit investigative reporting agencies who are just monitoring public procurement, and they are saving $1 million every year because of revealing the corruption and the murky schemes of the disposal of the budget money, which actually people respect. And this is one of the reasons why there is a strong background and a strong opportunity to gather money for the existing independent and free media.
Yeah. So I want to go to questions, but Corina, I'd like to hear from you on this point. You know, there is some very strong independent media in Moldova. What impact does it have? I mean, that's, you know, as Oleg is saying, I think that's, if people see that, then that can help build support. It can, you know, open the door to things like Patreon account subscriptions.
Yeah, I would connect it to the independent justice segment. A lot of things are revealed, and not always there is impact because of the investigative report that is conducted by our amazing investigative reporters. So in some cases, we do see impact. We do see corrupt officials prosecuted. But because the justice reform is one of the hardest to achieve or to conduct, to actually implement, it's lagging behind. Oleg mentioned Panama Papers. We had other big and resounding investigations where at the highest level officials were mentioned and nothing happened. We still do not have those who stole $1 billion from our budget in prison. Those schemes, some of them are still existing. And at the moment the justice sector will be reformed, then we will see more impact for the media. But we do see social issues being resolved. Even things that seem mundane, like networks of beggars that were pretending to be beggars, and investigative journalists actually traced them down. Legislation followed, and you cannot beg if you're a pretend beggar, if you pretend a disability, which I think it's fair enough, and I think it's an important impact, but it's just one example, a small example from tens that we've monitored only throughout these years that we are working here. I would, to tell you how much of the independent media, we've estimated that about 20% of the media is independent and the rest is oligarch influenced. If you consider also in this big pile, the TV stations. So it's still a long way to go in terms of independent media. And I saw a question there on who is ever independent? And I wouldn't be that skeptical. I would really look into monitoring reports by OSCE, by other monitoring organizations, because the person asked if anyone at all is independent. I would not put a blanket generalization about media. Definitely we have dedicated people that at times worked for free. They did work for free when they were housed by the Journalism Center in their in their rooms, and they fundraised and they found resources to exist. But at first, you do invest your own time and dedication throughout the years, being threatened. And you can see the list of those media outlets in the monitoring reports, those that independently cover elections, various controversial subjects, and these can be documented.
Okay. So going to the questions, this first one is from Alina Radu, who is, I believe her title is Executive Editor at ZDG, which is the site that you spoke about earlier. She says this is a question for me, and it's long, so let me just read through it quickly. I think the two of you are better qualified to address this. The question is about how Google and Facebook get money by ads from corrupt politicians in Moldova and promote a nice and fake image of them into Moldovan cyberspace. As investigative media, we refuse to take money from corrupt politicians and to promote them, but they enter on our web pages and on our space through Google ads or Facebook ads. There are no Google and Facebook offices in Moldova, and they don't answer our questions. Familiar story. Is there any chance to cooperate and ask the tech giants to stop taking money from big corruption in poor countries and to damage free media and free thinking and access to correct information in these spaces? Great question about big media. I don't know to what extent either of you have had this experience of trying to get some response from a Google or a Facebook.
From Facebook, we only had one instance of a success story when Facebook actually helped our NGOs to identify trolls during elections, troll farms in a previous government that resided in the government building. That was an amazing story, but that's it. The contact with Facebook staff is spotty, inconsistent, and sometimes non-existent. As Alina Radu mentioned, I don't know which level of access we should have. And why not for other bigger countries to get involved and actually talk sense into these money-making machines and ask them to actually take into account these aspects.
Yeah, so Alina was tossing this question to me. I don't have an answer, but I think, and I know that during the election, ZDG, very prominently said, we are not accepting ads from these people, which was great, except, it didn't completely work. It seems like it's a really good story for somebody to do. And that's the only way I can think of to try to get the attention of big tech. Anyway, next question says, consuming news on YouTube, is it taking some share away from TV, and are younger demographics getting their news on YouTube? That's certainly happening in Russia. I know much less about your two countries. Yeah.
It does happen. Influencers are an important source of information here. And though in Moldova, YouTube is not that prominent, I think Oleg mentioned it for Ukraine.
I think that if to talk about what is taking share from the regular TV, the TV on demand is taking share, and people are telling that they don't watch the regular TV, both cable or the terrestrial broadcast, but they are starting to watch the TV on demand, the online services, and that's actually what is going on online. But also at the same time, people are switching to the short formats of video content, and that's one of the phenomenon of the TikTok.
Yes,
this is very short and self-speaking videos.
Same here especially for teenagers and younger adults, as we call them. because we have an important segment of media literacy. Oleg mentioned that before, and I wanted to say that we do pay attention to the supply side, and that's the media, but also the demand side, the population, and their critical thinking. So luckily, we always had good cooperation with the government here in terms of introducing media literacy in schools, which means also digital safety, which means also critical thinking. We have textbooks adopted by the Ministry of Education and courses taught on every level of education in Moldova: primary school, secondary school, and high school. So that's definitely a success for us, but it definitely needs to be scaled up.
Okay, here's a question for both of you. How is the coverage of the buildup of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border? Are official outlets in particular covering this story?
I have the question, what is official outlet? Are we speaking about some newspaper of the parliament, which is just publishing the legislation and just promoting the members of parliament, or are speaking about some mainstream media? I would say that speaking about online media, most of the mainstream media are actually covering the topics of the Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, mostly referring to the sources in the United States and in Russia. So just representing both sides of the conflict and looking for the and providing the expertise or experts' comments to this. So I think that in Ukraine, as I said, like initially there was quite skeptical coverage that nothing would happen, but now it looks like the government is taking serious this, and both the media also are covering in a very serious way. And I'm not talking about the troll farms or about the media that are belonging to oligarchs and they have their own interests in this coverage.
Yeah. What about Moldova? Is this getting much coverage?
Not as much coverage because, honestly speaking, I don't think that media especially are taking it very serious. I suppose most experts here are considering it to be a threat, but one that is more to, how would I say that, add value to the Russian troops being present there, to manipulate, or to be more exact, to blackmail. Some experts from think tanks are worrying, and they analyzing more in depth these movements and what's happening between the bigger powers relating to this build up at the border. So that's all I can say.
Okay. Going back to the sustainability issue, here's a question that I think you might have different answers to. What is a viable price point for a member-supported outlet, and how does that compare to average income of the population? Also, do members have a role in the governance of the enterprise?
Well, we have a very good case study from another partner of ours, and they have implemented a membership system. We had to have an individual tailored research for this media outlet to find out specifically what their readers would be able to pay for it. So I wouldn't answer this question unless you survey the readers of this specific publication or a potential audience. You have to spend a bit of money to actually build the foundation for such a price, or for naming how much readers would be willing to pay. But this media outlet is also planning on events. They used to make money out of events pre-COVID. They even conducted one event this summer when the situation was still okay, and they still made money. So we're really hopeful that closer to the summer, they'll be able to have another way of making money, but they also have a very strong advertising base. So I would say not to rely on membership only. Even if you do to properly research it, but also to look at every other possibility of making money, because the times are such that media outlets have to think about an array of possibilities to make money, and they have to research and plan properly. Otherwise, they won't be successful.
Oleg?
Well, yeah, I would respond to the question, do members have a role in the governance of the enterprise? I would say that the members have the role, indirect role. So if you don't like what you're donated for or what you're a member for, you can just step out and don't do this. But at the same time, I would say that in most of the Ukrainian media that are trying to impose the membership system, they have a different level of the membership donations, like every month. And in some cases, they are starting with like $5 up to $50 or up to $40 per month. And in the most cases, the media is setting up a kind of public agreement with the donors. First, their donations are not hidden. So despite of GDPR, the newsroom knows who actually donated the money, since this is done through the bank transfers. And in case of the big donations, they are actually publishing the photos and the names of the donors. So it's transparent enough to make the temptation for the oligarchs to donate. And it's also stated in this public agreement that the newsroom is independent, and the donation doesn't mean that anybody can come and say that you should write in this or that way and cover the news in this or that way. So
I haven't seen any oligarchs actually fighting to donate for the independent media, Oleg. No attempts here. I'm sorry about that. They have their own media outlets.
I would say that it didn't happen in Ukraine as well, but I know that there were several offers that were done to the investigative reporters just to have a donation in exchange for just keeping silence on some topic, or just not disclosing the information. That is
attempts to be bribed. Yes, that happened, and that's something else.
Yeah, that's bribing is one of the actually ways to influence on the media in Ukraine as well.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, yeah, there are two ways for the people who want to get the control over the media. First is to purchase the whole media company, like it happened with several media during last elections, or just to bribe reporters and control reporters who are covering this stuff.
Yeah, so we've been going for just a little over an hour. We need to wrap up, but Oleg, I want to ask you about something we talked about a while ago, which was the purchase of Ukrainska Pravda, which was, I guess, the first independent digital site in Ukraine, still going, started with apparently a grant from the US Embassy in Ukraine. And it has, diversified its funding over the years. And then it was bought recently by a rich guy, but not really an oligarch, an investment banker who already owned one media house or one media entity, and said, I will not interfere editorially. And that all sounded really good. I'm just wondering, after what happened with the Kiev Post, whether anybody's a little more nervous about the sale of Ukrainska Pravda.
I think that the reporters and the newsroom of the Ukrainska Pravda might be a little nervous after what happened with the Kiev Post. And at the same time, I would say that the purchase of Ukrainska Pravda was done with the very tight and thorough setting up of the independence policy of the newsroom. And I hope that there is no way officially to get the control over the newsroom by the owner, since the agreement about the purchase expects the editorial independence, and I think that it's really hard to gain the control in the condition when the media has such a high reputation, and I don't know who owns the brand name, and I believe that they didn't sell the brand name. So that's the check and balances system when the owner has not the final control over the media, and that's probably the system that gives unity to this what happened with the Kiev Post.
Okay. Listen, thank you both. This has been so interesting, and it's great to hear about, you know, a couple of places that we don't hear very much about, but where there's a lot of good work being done, a lot of struggle still, but, you know, very important work. So thank you, and thank you very much to the Shorenstein Center and to everybody who joined today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to speaking to you, and I think that it was useful for the participants of our.
Yes, I hope so.
I hope so too.
Okay. Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Thank you.